The drums were beating. The air was thick with perfume, palm wine, and whispers. Just as the groom prepared to place the final bead necklace around his bride's neck, a voice shattered the celebration. "Please, marry us too." All eyes turned. It was the bride's sisters, kneeling, their voices trembling. What the groom asked in return would silence that village for generations. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. In the heart of rural Georgia, tucked between cotton fields and red clay roads, there existed a community that still held tight to the old ways. This wasn't just any neighborhood. This was Oakridge, a place where wedding ceremonies weren't simply celebrations of love, they were sacred covenants between families, between generations, between the living and those who came before. Here, marriage was more than a certificate or a kiss at the altar. It was a spiritual contract, witnessed not just by guests in their Sunday best, but by ancestors whose photographs lined the walls of every home. The families in Oakridge didn't believe in coincidence. They believed in destiny, in signs, in the way the wind moved through the magnolia trees on important days. And when it came to weddings, they followed rules passed down through blood and time. Chief among these rules was this: only one bride from each family line could marry in a season, or risk inviting chaos into both households. To break this rule was to disturb the balance, to question the wisdom of those who walked before, to potentially curse not just a marriage but an entire lineage. These weren't superstitions to be laughed at over brunch. These were laws written in the marrow of the community, respected by even the youngest children who played in the church parking lots after Sunday service. This story centers on three women. Keisha, 27 years old, had been chosen. That's what her grandmother called it, chosen. Chosen by destiny, chosen by a good man, chosen to carry forward the family's legacy of strong marriages and faithful love. Keisha worked as a nurse at the county hospital, had kind eyes and a laugh that could fill a room. She'd met her future husband, Darius, at a community barbecue 2 years prior, and their courtship had been the kind that made older women smile and nod with approval. Darius was the son of Reverend Thompson, a man whose prayers were said to have healed the sick and whose counsel had saved more than one marriage from collapse. Darius himself was an architect, had returned to Oakridge after working in Atlanta, bringing with him not just success but a genuine desire to build something lasting in the place that raised him. But Keisha had two sisters. Tamika and Shanice, twins 24 years old, had watched their older sister's engagement with what they told themselves was happiness. They smiled at the engagement party. They helped address wedding invitations. They stood beside Keisha at dress fittings, offering opinions on lace and hemlines. But beneath those smiles, something else grew. It started small, like most dangerous things do. A fleeting thought during a sleepless night: why her and not me? A moment of comparison while scrolling through Keisha's social media, seeing the flowers Darius sent, the weekend getaways, the comments from friends calling them a perfect couple. The twins had been in relationships that fizzled, had been on dates that went nowhere, had begun to wonder if their turn would ever come. When Darius began bringing gifts to the family home, as tradition required, the twins felt their hearts twist in ways they couldn't name. He brought Keisha's mother a beautiful shawl. He brought her father a bottle of aged whiskey and spent hours on the porch talking about everything from sports to scripture. And yes, he brought small gifts for the sisters too: beaded bracelets, a gesture of respect and inclusion, a way of saying you're family now too. Tamika slipped hers on and felt something shift inside her. Shanice held hers up to the light and saw not just beads but possibility. Neither sister spoke these feelings aloud. Neither admitted, even to each other, what was taking root in their minds. But the gifts sat on their nightstands, and at night, in the darkness of the room they still shared, each twin would touch her bracelet and wonder. Old Mrs. Patterson, the eldest in the community, had noticed. She noticed everything, had lived long enough to recognize the subtle signs of trouble before it bloomed. One afternoon, while helping prepare food for the upcoming wedding, she pulled Keisha's mother aside. "When envy enters the marriage house, storms will follow," she said quietly, her weathered hands still shelling peas. "Watch those girls. Love them, but watch them." Keisha's mother had nodded but dismissed it as the worried ramblings of an old woman who'd seen too much hardship in her 93 years. After all, her daughters loved each other. They'd shared everything since birth. Surely they could share in one sister's joy. But Mrs. Patterson knew better. She'd seen this story before, in different faces, different generations, and it always ended the same way. The night before the wedding, Keisha couldn't sleep. The house was finally quiet after a day of cooking and decorating and last-minute phone calls. She stood in the kitchen in her nightgown, drinking water, staring out at the backyard where tomorrow a tent would be filled with everyone she'd ever known. The moon was full, casting silver light across the grass, and that's when she saw her. An old woman, standing at the edge of the property line, near the ancient oak tree that had been there since before Oakridge had a name. Keisha's breath caught. She didn't recognize her, and in a community this small, you knew everyone. The woman wore a long dress that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and her eyes, even from this distance, seemed to look straight through Keisha and into some deeper truth. Keisha stepped outside, bare feet on cool grass. "Can I help you?" she called softly, not wanting to wake the house. The old woman smiled, but it wasn't the smile of greeting. It was the smile of someone who knows the ending of a story and pities those still living through the middle. "Two shadows will kneel at dawn," the woman said, her voice like wind through dried leaves. "One heart will be tested. A choice will echo for 20 harvests." Keisha felt goosebumps rise on her arms despite the warm night. "I don't understand," she whispered. The old woman tilted her head. "You will, child. When the moment comes, remember, truth burns but it does not consume. Lies burn and leave only ash." Before Keisha could respond, before she could ask who this woman was or what she meant, a cloud passed over the moon. In that brief darkness, the woman vanished. Keisha stood there, heart pounding, searching the shadows. Nothing. No one. Just the oak tree and the sound of crickets and her own ragged breathing. She went back inside, climbed into bed, and told herself it was just nerves, just the stress of the big day manifesting in strange ways. But sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams. In them, she stood in a great hall filled with people she didn't recognize but somehow knew were her ancestors. They sat in silent judgment, watching her, waiting. And behind her, she could hear two sets of footsteps, identical in rhythm, getting closer and closer. She tried to turn and see who was there, but the dream wouldn't let her. She could only stand and listen as the footsteps approached, as the ancestors leaned forward in their seats, as somewhere far away, drums that had been playing suddenly went silent. She woke with a gasp just as dawn was breaking, her sheets tangled around her legs, her sister Tamika watching her from the other bed with an expression Keisha couldn't quite read. Meanwhile, hours earlier, while Keisha had been encountering the mysterious woman, the twins had made a journey of their own. They'd told their parents they needed air, needed to walk off the excitement of tomorrow. But they didn't walk toward town. They walked the other direction, toward the woods that bordered the old Simmons property, toward a place everyone in Oakridge knew but no one discussed. The clearing had been there for generations, a circle of stones where, it was said, the first families had made agreements before there were churches or courts or written law. It was a place of power, neutral and ancient, and people only went there when they needed something desperately, when prayer wasn't enough and patience had run out. The twins stood in the center of the circle, holding hands the way they had as children, their bracelets from Darius catching starlight. "We're not doing anything wrong," Tamika whispered, though her voice shook. "We're just asking for what's fair." Shanice nodded, wanting to believe it. "We're just asking for a chance." They didn't know the exact words to say. There was no script for this, no instruction manual passed down. So they spoke from their hearts, or what they believed were their hearts, though hurt and want had twisted those hearts into something else. They asked for their turn. They asked for Darius to see them not as sisters-in-law but as possibilities. They asked for fate to reconsider its choice. And as they spoke, the air in the clearing seemed to thicken, to press against their skin like invisible hands. The temperature dropped despite it being August. And though neither twin would admit it later, they both felt it. The sensation of being heard by something vast and ancient and utterly indifferent to human happiness. When they finally left the clearing and returned home, they found their parents asleep, Keisha's bedroom door closed, everything as it should be. But the sky, which had been clear and star-filled, now held a strange quality of light, as if dusk and dawn were happening simultaneously, as if time itself had noticed their petition and marked the moment. How would you feel if your own family questioned your blessing? Drop your thoughts below. And if this story is keeping you on edge, hit that like button and let us know you're invested in how this unfolds. Morning came too fast and too slow. The house erupted into controlled chaos. Hair appointments, last-minute dress adjustments, the caterers arriving early, the musicians setting up under the tent. Keisha moved through it all in a strange fog, the old woman's words echoing in her mind, her dream lingering like smoke. But there was no time to dwell. There was only the next moment, the next task, the next hour bringing her closer to becoming Mrs. Thompson. By noon, guests began arriving. The community turned out in force, 3 generations deep, wearing their finest clothes, bringing covered dishes and wrapped gifts, filling the folding chairs arranged in neat rows facing the ancient oak tree where the ceremony would take place. This was Oakridge at its best, a family not of blood but of choice and history and mutual commitment to holding each other up. Darius stood near the tree with his father, the Reverend, who would perform the ceremony. Darius wore a suit his grandfather had worn at his own wedding, altered to fit but carrying the weight of successful marriages before him. He looked nervous but happy, kept adjusting his tie, kept looking toward the house where he knew Keisha was getting ready. His groomsmen teased him gently and he laughed, but his mind was already on the vows he'd written, on the life he was about to begin, on the woman who had somehow made him believe in forever. The twins were part of the bridal party, of course, wearing matching lavender dresses that Keisha had let them choose. They stood together, fixing each other's makeup, their bracelets from Darius visible on their wrists. To anyone watching, they seemed excited, supportive, perfect sisters celebrating a perfect day. But Tamika's hands shook as she applied lipstick. And Shanice kept glancing toward the clearing in the woods, as if expecting an answer to arrive, a sign that their petition had been heard. The music started. A string quartet, borrowed from the church in the next town over, began playing. Guests rose to their feet. The wedding party made their way down the makeshift aisle, grass under their feet, sunlight filtering through tree branches overhead. And then Keisha appeared and the world seemed to hold its breath. She was beautiful, not in a magazine way but in the way that matters, in the way that makes people think of their own wedding days, their own moments of hope and commitment. Her dress was simple, elegant, with lace at the shoulders that had belonged to her grandmother. Her hair was swept up, small flowers woven through the braids. And her face held a joy so pure that even the twins felt their hearts crack just a little, felt shame mixing with their envy because they loved her. They just wanted what she had so desperately it hurt. Keisha walked down the aisle on her father's arm, and he was crying unashamedly as fathers do. When they reached Darius, when her father placed her hand in the younger man's hand, Darius whispered something only she could hear, something that made her smile and blink back tears. The Reverend began speaking, his voice deep and certain, talking about covenant and commitment, about the ancestors watching and approving, about the sacred nature of what was about to occur. He spoke of the responsibilities of marriage, the joys and the challenges, the way two people became one while remaining themselves. Guests nodded along, some fanning themselves against the heat, others drying their eyes, all of them present in that moment, witnessing something holy. The vows were exchanged. Keisha's voice was clear and strong, speaking promises she meant to keep for a lifetime. Darius's voice shook with emotion but never wavered, his eyes never leaving her face. They exchanged rings. The Reverend smiled and reached for the final element of the ceremony, a tradition specific to their families. The bead necklace. It had been crafted by Darius's grandmother, who had passed 2 years prior, made from beads she'd collected over her lifetime, each one representing a prayer, a hope, a blessing for future generations. Darius was to place it around Keisha's neck as a symbol of her joining his family, of being adorned with the love and protection of his lineage. He lifted it carefully, the beads catching sunlight, red and gold and deep blue. Keisha bowed her head, ready to receive it, ready to become his wife in every sense. The moment stretched, perfect and complete. And then it shattered. Please. The word cut through the ceremony like a blade. Every head turned. The twins had stepped forward from the bridal party, had moved to stand in front of Darius and Keisha. And as everyone watched in shock as the music stopped and the Reverend's smile faltered, they knelt. Please, Tamika said again, her voice trembling but audible to everyone. Marry us too. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a child cried. Not a bird sang. Even the wind seemed to pause as if nature itself was stunned by what was happening. Keisha's face went white, then red, confusion and hurt and disbelief crossing her features in rapid succession. Darius stood frozen, the necklace still in his hands, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. The Reverend took a step back, his hand going to his chest, because he understood immediately the spiritual implications of what was occurring. The guests began to murmur, heads turning, voices rising in question and shock. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a planned surprise. This was something that shouldn't be happening, that couldn't be happening, not here, not now, not at a ceremony sanctified by tradition and blessed by the community. Keisha's mother stood up from her seat, moving toward her daughters, but Mrs. Patterson grabbed her arm, held her back, shaking her head slowly. Let it unfold, the old woman whispered. It has to unfold. Shanice lifted her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. We love him too, she said, and the words hung in the air, toxic and desperate. We can make him happy too. Please, we're family, we can share. The guests gasped. Some stood, unsure whether to intervene or bear witness. Keisha's father looked like he might collapse, his face stricken with shame and anger and confusion. How had this happened? How had his daughters, raised to respect tradition and family and the sacred nature of commitment, how had they come to this moment? Keisha herself couldn't speak. She looked at her sisters kneeling in the grass, looked at Darius whose expression had gone hard and unreadable, looked at the faces of everyone she'd ever known staring at this spectacle, and felt her perfect day crumbling into something nightmarish and surreal. And somewhere at the edge of the gathering, stood the old woman from the night before. She wasn't surprised. She'd seen the shadows kneel just as she'd predicted. Now came the testing. Darius lowered the necklace slowly. His face showed no anger, which somehow made the moment more frightening. He looked at the twins kneeling before him, really looked at them, and what he saw there made his jaw tighten. He saw jealousy wearing the mask of love. He saw want masquerading as devotion. He saw two people who had stood beside his future wife, who had eaten at his table, who had accepted his gifts, now trying to take what had never been theirs to claim. The Reverend moved to speak, to somehow salvage this disaster, but Darius held up a hand. "I'll handle this," he said quietly. He stepped closer to the twins and his voice, when he spoke, carried across the silent gathering. "You want me to marry you?" he asked. Tamika nodded quickly, desperately. Shanice wiped her face and nodded too. "You believe you love me enough to stand as my wife?" They nodded again, and Keisha felt something inside her shatter because even now, even seeing the pain they were causing, they were pushing forward. Darius glanced at his father, then at Mrs. Patterson, who stood still and watching, her ancient eyes knowing. He turned back to the twins. "Then you'll walk through the fire?" he said simply. The gasps that followed were immediate and loud. People stood, children were pulled back, and the Reverend grabbed his son's arm. "Darius, no, this isn't necessary." But Mrs. Patterson's voice rang out, stronger than her years should allow. "It is necessary. It's the old way, the true way. Let truth reveal itself." Keisha's mind raced. The fire. She'd heard stories, everyone had, about the old practice of truth testing through the sacred flames. It wasn't something anyone actually did anymore, it was folklore, a story to tell children about honesty and integrity. But here now, Darius was calling it into being, and somehow everyone understood why. If the twins truly believed they should be his wife, if they truly loved him rather than simply envied what Keisha had, then the fire would know. Truth would know. The men of the community, moving as if in a trance, began building it. They gathered wood from the pile near the house, meant for a celebratory bonfire later that night. They arranged it in the traditional way, a path about 10 feet long, narrow enough to walk but wide enough to matter. The flames caught quickly, rising waist-high, crackling and hot, smoke curling toward the cloudless sky. The twins stood, staring at the fire, and for the first time, doubt crossed their faces. This wasn't metaphorical. This was real. Actual flames, actual heat, actual consequence. Tamika looked at Shanice. Shanice looked at the bracelet on her wrist, the beads from Darius, the gift that had helped convince her this was destiny. She looked at Keisha, her sister, standing there in her wedding dress with devastation written across her face. And for just a moment, Shanice almost backed down, almost apologized, almost stopped this before it went further. But Tamika grabbed her hand. "We've come this far," she hissed. "The ancestors heard us last night. They'll protect us." It was a lie, a desperate rationalization, but Shanice wanted to believe it. So she nodded. Together the twins approached the fire. The heat hit them immediately, aggressive and consuming. Darius stood on the other side, his expression unreadable, the necklace still in his hands. "If your love is true," he said, "if your claim is just, walk through and join me." The twins removed their shoes as tradition required. Bare feet on grass, then ash, then the edge of where fire began. Tamika went first, stepping forward with her eyes closed, praying to whoever would listen, to the ancestors they'd petitioned, to fate itself. The flames roared higher as if in response. Her first step was bearable. The second made her wince. By the third, she was gasping, her feet burning not with surface heat but with something deeper, something that felt like it was judging the very intention of her heart. She tried to push forward but stumbled, falling to her knees at the edge of the fire path, crying out in pain and shame. The men rushed forward, pulling her back, checking her feet which were blistered and raw. She sobbed, curling into herself, and when people looked at her wrist, her bracelet from Darius had somehow tarnished, the beads gone black and dull. Shanice stared in horror. She looked at her own bracelet, still shining, and felt a surge of desperate hope. Maybe she could make it. Maybe her love was different, truer. Maybe the fire would accept her where it had rejected her sister. She stepped forward before anyone could stop her, and the flames seemed to lean toward her, hungry and knowing. Her first step made her scream. Not from physical pain, though that was there, but from a deeper agony, the sensation of every selfish thought, every jealous moment, every time she'd looked at Keisha with resentment instead of love, all of it burning through her consciousness like acid. She couldn't take another step. She fell immediately, and as she did, her bracelet too turned black, the beads cracking and falling from the string, scattering into the flames where they dissolved into smoke. Keisha moved without thinking, running toward her sisters, but the old woman was suddenly there, a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "Let truth reveal itself," she said again, and Keisha stopped, tears streaming down her face, torn between compassion for her sisters and the betrayal that cut so deep she felt it in her bones. The fire began to die down naturally, quickly, as if its purpose was complete. The twins lay on the ground, being tended to by community members, their feet burned, their pride destroyed, their secret desires now revealed to everyone who mattered. The Reverend bowed his head, praying quietly. Guests stood in shocked silence, processing what they'd just witnessed, a story they would tell for generations. And Darius walked through the dying flames, his own feet bare, and didn't so much as flinch because truth, when it walks, fears no fire. He crossed to Keisha and held out the necklace. "I have one bride," he said clearly, loud enough for all to hear. "I have always had one bride. And the ancestors have confirmed it." The twins were helped to their feet, their mother and father supporting them, faces etched with shame and sorrow and a love that persisted despite everything. They'd been revealed, their hearts laid bare by flames that didn't lie, and they knew with certainty they could never stay in Oakridge now, not after this, not with everyone knowing what they'd tried to do, what they'd been willing to destroy for their own wants. They would leave, moving to different cities, carrying the scars on their feet and the heavier scars on their souls, learning slowly over years the difference between wanting and loving, between envy and genuine care. But that was future pain, future lessons. In this moment, they simply stood and walked away from the ceremony, their lavender dresses stained with ash and grass, their matching bracelets gone to darkness, their sisterhood with Keisha something that would take decades to even begin repairing if it could be repaired at all. Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly, satisfied. She'd seen truth prevail, had seen the old ways prove their worth one more time. The ancestors had witnessed, had judged, had made their will known through the oldest test of all. Fire doesn't lie. Fire reveals. And these flames had revealed exactly what needed to be seen, that love built on envy cannot stand, that wanting someone's happiness is not the same as being worthy of it, that some blessings are not meant to be shared no matter how desperate the asking. The old woman caught Keisha's eye across the gathering, offered a small nod, and then simply faded back into the crowd, her purpose complete, her warning proven prophetic. Keisha never saw her again at any other community gathering, and years later would wonder if she'd been a real woman at all or something else, some ancestral spirit sent to prepare her for the test to come. The Reverend cleared his throat, drawing attention back. "We will continue," he said firmly, and there was something in his voice that allowed no argument, that demanded respect and completion. What has been tested has been proven. What has been revealed has been witnessed. Now let us complete what we came here to do. And slowly, with a kind of collective exhale, the community settled back into their seats. The musicians picked up their instruments again, though their hands shook. The ceremony resumed from where it had been interrupted, as if the fire walk had been some strange intermission, some necessary trial that had to be passed before the Betrayal celebration could begin. Darius stood before Keisha once more, the necklace in his hands, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that spoke of new understanding, new respect, new recognition of what they'd both just endured. He lifted the necklace, and this time nothing interrupted. He placed it around her neck, and the beads seemed to glow in the afternoon light, warm against her skin, a weight that felt right and earned. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend said, and his voice cracked with emotion because this wasn't just a wedding anymore, it was a victory, a confirmation, a moment that had been tried by fire and emerged true. "You may kiss your bride." And when Darius kissed Keisha, the gathered community erupted in applause that was louder, more heartfelt, more genuine than any wedding celebration in Oakridge's memory. They clapped because love had won. They clapped because truth had been revealed. They clapped because they'd witnessed something ancient and powerful, something that reminded them why traditions exist, why some rules matter, why the ancestors' wisdom still holds weight even in modern times. The reception that followed was subdued at first, everyone still processing, but gradually joy returned, tentative and then fuller, as people ate and danced and celebrated a marriage that had been tested before it even began and had survived. Keisha and Darius moved through the party, accepting congratulations, and with each hug, each blessing, each knowing look from elders who understood what had really happened today, their bond strengthened. That night, after the guests had left and the tent was being taken down, Keisha stood once more in the backyard, now as a married woman, the necklace still around her neck. She looked at the spot where the fire had burned, now just scorched grass and scattered ash. Darius came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. She was silent for a long moment, thinking about her sisters, about how close she'd come to losing everything, about the strange old woman and the fire and the test that had seemed impossible until it wasn't. "I'm sad," she admitted. "I'm hurt. I'm angry. But I'm also grateful." She turned in his arms to face him. "The fire showed the truth. And the truth is you chose me. Not because you had to, not because tradition demanded it, but because when given the chance to walk away or complicate everything, you chose what was real." Darius nodded, pressing his forehead to hers. "Envy dressed as love will always stumble in the fire," he whispered, words that would become their private reminder, their touchstone whenever jealousy or comparison threatened their peace. Years later, Keisha would tell their children this story, all of it holding nothing back. She would tell them about their aunts who loved wrongly and paid the price, about the fire that revealed truth, about the old woman who may have been an ancestor in disguise. And her children would understand that love is not something to be taken or shared against its will, that blessing someone else's joy is its own form of love, that envy is poison dressed in pretty words. The twins eventually reached out 10 years after that day, with letters of apology that were sincere and hard-won, written after a decade of therapy and growth and learning who they were outside of competition with their sister. Keisha forgave them, slowly, carefully, because forgiveness is not forgetting but choosing to release the weight of anger. They would never be as close as they once were, the fire had seen to that, but they found a new kind of relationship, one built on honesty and respect and the acknowledgement that they'd all been changed by what happened at that wedding. And in the end, truth is the only foundation strong enough to build a life upon. Now we want to hear from you. How would you have felt if someone you trusted tried to take your blessing right in front of everyone you loved? Share your thoughts in the comments below because your perspective matters and we want to know how this made you feel. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of something true about love and loyalty, do us a favor. Hit that like button right now. It helps more people find stories that matter, stories that don't just entertain but transform. And if you haven't already, click that subscribe button and turn on notifications because we're bringing you more stories like this, stories rooted in wisdom and struggle. Thank you for watching.